Percy Jackson might just be my favorite thing in the world. Without delving too deeply into the treasure trove that is the entire literary world of Percy Jackson, needless to say, I have spent hundreds of hours consuming this wonderful character and the stories contained within the magical world he inhabits. When the first movie came out in 2010, right after the original book series ended, it would be an understatement to say I was over the moon excited. When I finally watched it, yeah, sucked. Even then, at 13 years old with no real comprehension of what made things good or bad, it was just so easy to tell that they failed to capture nearly everything that made the series so special. They botched the characters, the settings, the atmosphere. Maybe it wasn't an awful movie, but it was a really, really bad adaptation. And as I got older and got more into analyzing things and grew a love for countless other franchises that got adapted into other forms of media, I got to see a ton of my favorite things get both great and terrible adaptations. I revisited the Percy Jackson movies and oh my god, they're even worse than I remember. Artemis Fowl, Avatar, Dragon Ball Z, we are one in the same. But this video isn't about that. It's about the new show on Disney+. And after watching the whole show and getting opinions from many people I am close to, as well as perusing the internet for every type of thought process, rationalization, and general ranting I could find, I can now confidently say I think it's pretty fine? It's not bad, but there's no way I could call it great. Let's start with some of the less nuanced good stuff. I like the settings. Most of the settings. Camp Half-Blood gets a huge glow up from the terrible forest-infested one of the movies, and it gives off a lot of the same magic, thrill, and safety from the books. The safety aspect is something the later books focused on a lot, as it stops being this new strange land for Percy and becomes his actual home, where his best friends and the people he trusts most live. And this depiction of Camp Half-Blood gives me a lot of hope that that element of the books will translate well in the show. A lot of the side characters are pretty great interpretations with great performances and good writing. Some notable ones that stuck out to me were Clarice, Luke, Sally, Mr. D, Ares, even Hermes. I have high hopes that all of these characters will get even better and grow with the show as it goes on, and that's something you'll hear me mention a lot throughout this video. For all my complaints and dislikes, and unfortunately there are a good handful of them, I do see an immense amount of potential here. In fact, one of my main issues I had with this first season is something that Rick Riordan, the original writer of the books, who's involved in a pretty heavy capacity with the show, has already publicly stated they want to work on going forward, that being the humor. For all the high stakes and pressure present throughout this entire series, the books had a wonderful sense of humor that is not translated to the show at all. Granted, a ton of it came from the fact that the books were written from Percy's POV, meaning we were always inside his head and got a lot of humor from his general comments and worldview. But still, we'll touch on that in a second. For the main cast, I think Grover is great and borderline perfect, though he's the only member of the three I can say that for. I was initially thrilled with Percy's casting of Walker Scobell after his movie with Ryan Reynolds, and especially his commercials with him just ooze so much raw Percy energy.
Kraft mac and cheese. If your parents don't buy it, stop loving them. No.
But I think he's being severely underutilized here. Harkening a bit back to the show lacking a tremendous part of the book's humor, this Percy is relatively unrecognizable from the book one. That might be a bit of an overstatement, but I do largely mean it. Yeah, he's courageous and sassy at times, and there are lots of moments where he's clueless and confused, but not nearly enough. Those three words could perfectly sum this character up, and only one of them has been constant throughout this first season, the easiest trait for a main character hero to have. Changing a characteristic of a main character isn't immediately a problem, but it usually is when you alter several aspects of a character and that doesn't result in them being better. Not better as a person, just a better character, since flaws are often good. Percy is full of them. But when you've got a beloved series, beloved largely due to the main character, why on earth would you not work to translate him one for one? Then we get into Annabeth, which is quite different. I think Leah Jeffries is doing a pretty good job of portraying Annabeth Chase, and a good deal of my problems with her character in the show are due to the writing, not the actress. Visually, of course, she is quite different, which I'm not a fan of in general when you've got such a clear description of a character and their change, but sometimes an actor or actress embodies a character so amazingly well that they can transcend that kind of stuff. I typically like my castings to be as accurate as possible when possible, and it's probably largely since I'm such a hardcore fan, but picturing a dark-haired, green-eyed boy and a stormy gray-eyed blonde girl together and embarking on such a lengthy journey with them just makes it a bit hard at first to connect with the newer versions when they visually don't look similar. I think both of these characters suffer just a little bit because of it, but both of their performances do give me a lot of optimism that they can forge out either their own path to becoming these characters, kind of like Sherlock Holmes or comic book superheroes, where each new version is a chance to make a new iteration of the character, a slightly new take, or they can grow to embody their characters even more. And yes, I would describe Arian Simhadri as embodying the character so well that he transcends whatever the book description of his visuals may be. I adore that they name the episodes like chapters in books, but by God is this show ever hurt by the runtimes.
Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
But why?
The tension suffers a lot because problems are resolved so rapidly. Things just go by at breakneck speed, and it removes a huge element of the books, which is how scared, confused, and lost the kids were throughout this whole adventure, especially Percy. The scene in Krusty's waterbed palace is honestly disgusting and a perfect encapsulation of a few things I really dislike about this show. Book aside, how is it enjoyable for Percy to storm into a monster's base and be like, hey, I know your shtick, it's boring, Annabeth, get him, we got him, okay, moving on. Finding out who Krusty is and what he does is a minor and small chapter in the book, but it impacts the reader a lot more than Percy just already knowing what he's up to. Why does this Percy just know everything? How can he know this? This show has an awful awful habit of telling instead of showing, and nowhere is it more evident than right here. This is also a good example of what I said before, where book changes can easily be made here and there. No problem. In the book, Krusty's is just a spot they stop on their journey before moving on, and the entrance to the underworld is in a record label store where it plays kind of the same, eventually leading them into the underworld. That change is fine. It doesn't make the story better, but with a short runtime, I guess cutting out another location that isn't essential to the narrative is fine. Changing Percy to just knowing Procrustes and his gimmick, defeating him absolutely instantly with zero resistance, that's a bad change. This is the exact type of book change that makes me worried about Rick Riordan being involved. He has said several times that since he is the writer, you can trust the changes he makes will honor the story and characters, which is something I wholeheartedly agreed with before the show aired. But this is just straight up worse. I think it is extremely worth noting that I wrote the majority of what I've said so far before the finale aired. I usually do that so I can make these videos as fast as possible, and if the finale severely changes anything I said, I can just edit it and rewrite it. I left it this way, however, because I thought it would be fun to now discuss how the finale may have impacted my thoughts on the 7 episodes prior. And it did, actually. I think the finale made the show a bit worse. And I'm now confident in saying I don't like this Percy Jackson. The heart, soul, main appeal, best part of every book he's in is actively one of the weaker parts of the show, and that just breaks my whole heart, man. Let's start with his fight with Ares. It's kinda the same. Yeah, here it lasts for about 4.5 seconds, but the book chapters were also quite short. None of the little mini arcs like the Lotus Casino or Auntie M's or his fight with Ares were ever gonna take place over the course of like 2 whole episodes. They're short in the books, there just isn't enough content for that. But still, it feels like the show manages to rush it nonetheless. Anyways, Ares, the god of war, Percy, 11, a child, very tired and scared, barely has a basic inkling of his powers and has shown zero proficiency with his sword. The books actually make an effort to show Percy's swordsmanship. In camp before departing for his adventure, he has a hard time finding a sword that is balanced to him. Eventually, Chiron gives him Riptide, his iconic ballpoint pen sword. Originally named Anaklusmos, we see Percy immediately become more competent and we get to see scenes of him training with Luke. Kinda like the flashback we see in the finale, but it's shown to us beforehand to set up some of his swordsmanship, not to justify it later down the line. Small nitpick in regards to when I'd prefer the scene to take place in the narrative, but it does serve to strengthen the bond between Percy and his sword, which is a huge part of his character, and it helps to strengthen his bond with Chiron, which is sorely lacking in this show. Where Percy should see Chiron as arguably the person he trusts and respects most in the entire world, here he's relegated to mostly just a guy who works at the camp. He also learns of his water powers way better in the books. On several occasions he doesn't get wet, which is one of the powers he learns of the quickest. It's like the first thing he finds out he can do. When he was wet the first few times in the show, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool, he'll get there. But then he just doesn't. Also on the St. Louis Arch, he jumps into the water from that immense height with hopes his father's power will protect him. He doesn't know the water is safe from him, he has no idea he can do that. It's a leap of faith. He even prays to his father as he jumps. In the show, he just falls and happens to hit water and get lucky. So when he's fighting Ares, they clang swords for about a second. Percy summons a moderate wave to strike Ares, and this incapacitates him enough for Percy to get a shot at. Whatever, it's fine, but a bit boring. This moment doesn't feel earned at all because we don't see Percy suddenly turn on the seriousness in the face of mortal danger and become the badass he is because he's just always been like that. The books do a god-tier job of building Percy up and making us earn his badass moments. Here it's just handed to us with no real fanfare. His conversation with Zeus is pretty good. This is exactly the type of moment Percy should be snarky and rebellious. But Zeus himself is a bit strange. Him trying to vaporize Percy for running his mouth is totally fine. But why does he want to go to war with Poseidon so badly? We never learn that he thinks for sure Poseidon stole it, so it's not pure revenge. He doesn't have anything he wants from Poseidon. He freely acknowledges that he knows about Kronos rising. He knows Kronos wants them to weaken each other. He gets his bolt back. He should have no vendetta against Poseidon, and when he surrenders, Zeus is just like, okay, cool, let's convene the council, let's kill that. Is it just pure pettiness that he declared war and now has to win? I mean, the more I say it, the more that sounds exactly how book Zeus would operate, but that leans a bit into the humorous and more fantastical elements of the book that this show is largely omitted. So what style are they going for here? Lance Reddick gives us an excellent performance and shows us a Zeus who would be pragmatic and wise, not childish and petulant. The ending is good. The confrontation with Luke is solid. Charlie Bushnell plays this role really well, and I think he's gonna flourish tremendously when he transitions into being more sneaky and antagonistic. I actually read something really cool about why Percy missed the deadline in the show, since in the books he makes it in the nick of time. Luke had a quest not long ago, one that he failed, which, in his eyes, ultimately resulted in his fellow campers and Hermes and the other gods to pity him and perhaps look down on him. This is from the books. But now here comes Percy. His quest is to bring an item to a place on a certain date, and he fails that. Zeus even rudely makes it a point to tell Percy he failed, which is a good subtle way of showing how the gods perceive the demigods. No matter what the demigods do for the gods, it'll never be good enough, and the gods will always easily find a way to chastise them for it. Anyways, after Percy fails his quest, just like Luke did, he comes back to camp and is celebrated as a hero. This farthers that divide between Luke and Percy, as Luke eventually grows to resent Percy as much as he respects him. It's a really neat relationship. That would be a book change that is good and makes the story better. Also in this final scene, Luke kind of faltering when he sees Annabeth is great. We didn't spend too much time on their relationship in this season, which is fine, there's plenty of time for that in the future. But both of them have an incredibly hard time watching the other's role going forward. Annabeth has to watch Luke, her role model, the person that saved her whom she loves to death, forget his ways and turn on the gods. And Luke always thought Annabeth would be on his side no matter what, so when she comes to oppose him and side with both Percy and the gods, he's devastated. All of this is conveyed in just a few seconds, but it's excellent visual storytelling. A few random thoughts. I really liked the scene of Grover and Ares in the diner. Their whole conversation was new and interesting and gave them both a bit more depth while letting us see Annabeth and Percy alone. Though their mini-quest, recovering Ares' shield, features easily the god I hate the most here, Hephaestus, who is portrayed by Timothy Odmanson, looking handsome and resplendent? Hephaestus. This is a horrible change from the books and from Greek mythology in general. Hephaestus being ugly and gruff and cranky is a huge aspect of his character. He was cast away by his family, by his mother Hera, as a baby because he was so ugly and detestable. No matter what he did, he was always scorned and ignored because of something he couldn't control. His looks. Sound familiar? Being ignored and disliked, lonely because of something he was born with? Every demigod is the exact same way, and because of this, Hephaestus has a very well-hidden affinity towards demigods. He doesn't love them, he doesn't go out of his way to help them, but when they cross paths, you can feel that slight bond they share having gone through similar circumstances. They can connect with what the other is feeling, if just a little bit. They miss the mark here a ton, and they gain nothing from having him appear as suave and sophisticated. It's just such a weird change, and I'm not sure why the show seemed to go to such lengths to make every character visually different from the books. Was it a desire to distance himself from the movies, which Riordan has publicly stated he despises? Maybe that was the goal with this whole show, to reimagine Percy Jackson just a little bit. That's kind of the lens through which I watched that new The Last of Us show, where it was clearly an adaptation, but they tweaked enough in regards to the characters that they kind of became their own versions. I kind of liked how they did that. But I gotta say, for Percy Jackson, that's not something that sits well with me. And the more I wrote this script, the more that optimistic of the future comment of mine started feeling a bit worse and worse. Reimagining or not, why in the world would they have Percy and Sally reconnect off screen? The Chronos stuff was kind of cool, but I didn't think it was going to lead into Sally and Percy just being back at home right as rain. Also, Gabe is a lot more toned down in the show, isn't he? He's like a straight up foul, disgusting monster in the books, and here he's just kind of a dick, and he's sort of even kind of funny at times. Sally literally kills Gabe with the head of Medusa, and it isn't even remotely seen as a bad thing. That's how vile Gabe was. Just worth kind of noting.
If you don't like it, I'll find you.
Whoa, whoa!
Why won't he just say the line?
This might be my fault.
It's a pretty good show. I know, I didn't really express that nearly as much as I talked about what I didn't like about the show, but I just found it really hard to gloss over any of my negative points. When I say Camp Half-Blood looks great, we can move on. No real need to delve deeper. But when I say this Percy feels wrong, I obviously have to dedicate a fair amount of time in justifying that. I do have hope for this show in the future. Hope it will turn into the excellent show I think it can be, the excellent show this series deserves. One of the largest issues with this show as a whole was completely out of their control, being the rush pace due to the short runtimes, and then the lack of humor, something Riordan said they wanted to improve going forward. Fixing those two things alone would go a long way in improving this show, and these characters only get better as the books progress. There's nothing to suggest that won't be the case here, even if they progress and begin just a little differently. I'm mostly talking about the main three, as the rest of the side characters are pretty solid and accurate. My optimism for the show going forward remains, and it does seem like a ton of people who watched this show were really happy with what they got. I'm not here to change people's minds, just to point out some areas in which I think the show missed the mark a bit and can improve on going forward. I want nothing more for the show than for it to reach its ultimate potential, and I do trust Rick Riordan quite a lot, even if I think he made some odd decisions in this first season. He's always written these characters and this world incredibly faithfully. If you're a hardcore Percy Jackson fan, or you know someone who is, then you know how passionate this fanbase is and how much they deserve to have their beloved IP treated well. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe if you like this kind of stuff and you want to support the channel, and take care. Until next time.